Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while since I've done a movie review, and it's good to come back to a good one, as opposed to coming back to a movie you're like, oh, why did I break this streak with this movie? Of course, I saw Gravity this week, and it is a really, really good suspense film. Very much a good complementary piece to Apollo 13. It doesn't, have that event style film as Apollo 13, but if you want a space disaster movie, I mean, let's face it, the list of space disasters are kind of short and hard to make movies out of without making them character pieces, shall we say. Challenger kind of blows up like that when it goes. The Russian guys, both shuttle disasters are kind of like that when they went. But let's not get called into that. Let's talk about Gravity, which, by the way, great performances by, really, there's only two actors in this movie. And I'm actually pulling up IMDb right now, because what you basically have in this film is you have two actors and two voice actors in this movie. That's pretty much the cast. And about three dummies. I'll get into that a little bit. Of course, directed by Alfonso Cuarón, and I'm kind of curious how they made this film, because I did catch Jon Stewart's interview with Sandra Bullock, and they talked about how they apparently, if I had just seen this film and not seen this interview, I would have assumed that they shot most of it using what they did in Apollo 13. Is, in case you don't know, if you take like a cargo plane and you shoot it right up and you fly pretty straight and then make a sudden dive, you'll get like 30 seconds of real, actual, authentic zero-G. In fact, NASA does this to help train astronauts so they learn how to work in zero-G. And when they filmed Apollo 13, one of the reasons it looked so good was they basically built a set in a C-130, I think it was, and basically would go up there and just do the up and down stuff all the time, so that they would actually film the actors doing zero-G stuff. It wasn't a real, technically it wasn't a special effect in the way that we like to think of some sort of manipulation. They legitimately got them to float. However, apparently Sandra Bullock said that she signed on knowing that, originally she signed on and they said they were going to do that, but apparently they did it in some other manner. Apparently having some sort of jury rig device that helped her float around, and very interested in how they pulled that off. We'll definitely be willing to take a look at we want to look how they did that. And while I went off on that little tangent, yes, what I was going to mention is it would. All right, so it looks like there is a couple of extra voice actors than I thought, but of course you have Sandra Bullock as Ryan Stone, who I'm kind of curious, given that character's name, if they had originally written that as a male role, and like they did some minor revisions later on. I don't know. I could be wrong. Though George Clooney at one point does go, what kind of a name is Ryan for a girl anyway? By the way, George Clooney in it as the mission commander, Matt Kowalski, and I'll talk about his character in a little bit. His character was a lot of fun. And this is confirmed. When I heard this voice, and this is especially why this is good complimentary with Apollo 13, Ed Harris, you only hear his voice, but he's the voice of Mission Control. Because as I'm listening, like, that's the voice from Apollo 13. That's the Mission Control guy from Apollo 13. So Ed Harris really, really likes space movies, is what I'm guessing. he is a big NASA fan. Either that, or he basically everyone tries to get him because he was Apollo 13. He played that role really well. The only other actor you have is Paul Sharma, who I think they used a model. He only did voice, but now that I look at the actor's picture here, there is a special effect, and it looks like they definitely molded his face at least. Outside of that, there's like 2 other voice actors, so it's a really tiny cast. Yeah, even if that's it. That is tiny cast, really. One other actor who is, I'll talk about that in a second. So you can see it's a really tiny cast, so it's a very tight character-based film. And also a bit of the event and the suspense and the horror of what's going on. Now, for those of you that don't know the plot, basically they're on a mission, a normal shuttle mission. Even though we retired the shuttle, but we're not going to let that stop us from making a movie, and I'm okay with that. I find it a shame that the shuttle missions are shut down. We really should have had a second generation of shuttles by now, but. Hey, look at this. When it does come to funding, I am very much for giving NASA a ton of money. I have no problem with my tax dollars going for that. Well, if you tax me an extra $50, and I'm honest with this, throw another $50 worth of taxes on me a year, purely for NASA research, I would not raise an eyebrow. In fact, I'd probably say, you sure don't want to make it 51? But that's besides the point. Because I'm a fucking nerd. That's why. But they're on a mission. They're doing their regular spacewalk stuff. And, of course, you have Sandra Bullock, her first time up. And you got George Clooney, who's, of course, the experienced commander. It's his last mission. Kind of stereotypical with that. And you only see him floating around and hear the dog barking in the background. There's another guy, he's kind of floating in the background. You never see his face. I wouldn't be surprised if his entire role was technically CGI. And they're flying around, they're doing their mission. They get the banter, to get a little bit of characterization of their roles. And they get a call from NASA. Apparently the Russians shot down one of their own satellites with a missile. And it created a debris field. And then another minute or 2 goes by, and then they call back and say, abort mission, get in there now, get out. They hear him also calling the ISS and International Space Station and telling them to get out of the, abort, get into your lifeboat and get out of orbit, because apparently the Russian satellite, the debris from that is causing a chain reaction. It's hitting other satellites, and debris is just spreading and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. With each satellite it takes out, it creates more and more debris. And I've actually read about this as one of the big fears that scientists and NASA, the Russians, the EU Space Agency, the Chinese, Japanese, anyone that has anything in space, they're really afraid of this happening one day. Like, this is a legit fear that this could actually happen, that you will create so much chain reaction from debris field, you'll actually wind up taking out the entire satellite network, with the exception of, like, a couple of the geosynchronous orbit weather satellites, like the only ones that are far enough away that they won't be affected by a debris field. That's about it. But so this is happening. They're trying to get in, but of course the debris field hits. Sandra Bullock's character gets thrown out, and basically for about a good portion of the film, you got Sandra Bullock's character, not a good portion, but the first part of the film, it's Sandra Bullock's character and George Clooney. George Clooney, like, you have her flying off out into space, and basically at that point it's, you know how in most movies you see the guy that goes zooming on out, like something happens from a film, he's like normally the red shirt, and he gets kicked out and he's floating off, and you're like, well, that guy is fucked. You get to see what that guy is like. And by the way, a good portion of this movie is told they do first person to kind of just show how freaky this would be in this really awkward suit to try to reach and grab stuff, and the disorientation of the fact that there's no gravity, and also you're dealing with pure Newtonian physics. An object in motion will remain in motion. So without doing it, there's no friction to slow you down. If you're spinning, you will continue to spin. There's no way to really stop that without hitting something else. So they tell a lot of this movie through first person perspective, and it's really effective for you to understand just how freaky it is. Like when they're asking her to give her position, what's a landmark, and you're seeing it from her perspective, flipping it around, so you all of a sudden understand it, as you yourself cannot identify anything. You can't see, you notice, it makes this character very relatable quickly, because it does put you in her shoes, and you're like, fuck, I couldn't do that. It's a really good way to actually bypass the old armchair audience going, yeah, well, she just has to grab that thing and that hold, and she can haul herself out. Now, of course, you can see that because you're looking at a still shot from a third-person perspective at the perfect angle. So when the movie does throw you into her perspective, you can understand why she's panicking. Even you yourself are like, oh, how the hell is she going to be able to grab onto something? Or how is she able to pick this stuff out? They do make the point she's a trained astronaut. She's apparently considered like a genius. They don't really her actual mission. She apparently designed some sort of modular for the Hubble, something that was used in medical science, but she's now has been adapted for space travel. So they do point out she's a genius. So you can kind of buy when she's doing stuff that you wouldn't be able to think of. Okay, astronaut. I'm not an astronaut. I normally will go into the assumption that astronauts can do astronaut stuff better than I can. So you can buy that stuff. But as the movie goes, you kind of understand. By the way, no, I'm going to hold off on that in a moment, because we'll talk about her character first before I had to talk about the fetus shot. You'll understand what I'm talking about when I explain it. Or if you've seen the movie, you know exactly the shot I'm talking about. But you've got Sandra Bullock's character. I told it a little bit. It's her first mission. They make it very clear when she starts off. She's still not used to this whole being in space thing. She's a little clumsy with stuff. She kind of says, like, one of her tools is starting to float off, that she was really used to working in a hospital basement where, she's used to this. It just rolls onto the floor and she doesn't really care. But as the movie progresses, and mostly through George Clooney talking with her through this situation, you come to learn that she finds a lot of solace in the isolation of space, and she makes a lot of mention of that. Early on she says she doesn't like to hear. You get the sense that this character doesn't like to hear talking. It's kind of weird, but it makes sense later on when she reveals that she had a child, because George Clooney's trying to talk her down. Obviously get classic technique to get someone distracted, calm down, get them to talk about themselves, talk about stuff they know, they calm down, and in that conversation she reveals that she was a mother, but her son died at the age of 4 in a playground accident, playing on some jungle gyms or whatever, slipped, fell, and cracked his skull, and that she received the news while she was out driving, and ever since then she kind of just drives for the isolation of being away from people and such. And that comes back because later on the character becomes very fatalistic, and you understand why she's fatalistic because of that. She does a very good balancing act in this. I will give her a lot of credit, because Sandra Bullock is one of those actresses that I think it has fallen off the radar, and to a degree rightfully so, based on her older performances. But here she shows some really good acting chops, and it's making me kind of reevaluate her as basically being a character that I think got stuck in some of these comedic roles. And I hope this kind of gives her a bit of a second launch and a second look into some of her more serious stuff. Because she won me over. But there is a scene where she finally gets into the ISS, and spoiler alerts right here. She's the only one that makes it to the International Space Station. George Clooney's character, rather like nonchalantly, just like he kind of. I'll talk more about that when we talk. I'll talk about George Clooney next, but she then kind of like she's out of oxygen basically. She's mostly breathing in CO2 at this point, and she pops her helmet off and she's like breathing in the air and she's like relaxing from it, and then her body starts to go into a fetal position, and the tethering cord is like floating in the background, and as the camera pulls out, she's in like the perfect stereotypical fetal position with the cord angled so the cord looks like it's coming right out of her belly button, and it's like symbolism. Yeah, way over. They a little heavy-handed in that scene. You figured out you could do that shot and you put it in the movie. We get it, but it's kind of it's an awkward shot, and I almost get the sense that the director realized he could do that shot, and he's like, I'm gonna force that shot into this movie no matter what. I have a feeling that was one of those shots. That was one of those scenes. But that's her character. At one point, she actually becomes extremely resigned to death. Like, she was already kind of fatalistic throughout most of it, and she tries to contact Houston. She finally gets to the Soyuz capsule, but it's too damaged to actually re-enter the atmosphere. And she can only raise somehow, even though the whole global satellite network has been wiped out, some random guy in East Asia, I'm not sure which language he was speaking, if it was Chinese, Korean, Japanese, or something from Southeast Asia. She's trying to have a conversation, and it's obvious the guy's probably a ham radio operator, just like fidgets and having fun trying to contact people. And the guy's excitedly making jokes. He's got a kid with him. You can hear the kid kind of making baby sounds in the background. And so she just at that point decides to off herself. She decides to turn off the oxygen to the capsule, just listen to the sounds of the baby and the happy dad while she dies from CO2 asphyxiation. However, as she passes out, knock on the door, it's George Clooney's character starting to open up the capsule door. And honestly, with the way George Clooney was playing this character, I totally was buying that this was the character. Spoiler alert right here, big time. It turns out this was one of those near-death dream sequences that Hollywood likes to do sometimes. But unlike a lot of times where there is something a little off about the way the whole situation, any other character you would find this way too convenient, the character way too calm. But the way George Clooney's character was in this movie, you could totally buy this guy pulling off something like this, where he does manage to make his way back. And he kind of comes in and is kind of jokey, very nonchalant, just kind of very much like, yeah, we'll get through this whole thing. Yeah, it's no biggie. And again, most of the time, this is like red flags. You're like, oh, this is a dream sequence. This is way too convenient. Again, with the way the character was earlier, you totally buy it. The only thing, and I was getting ready to call bullshit because I was buying that this was actually legitly going on in the movie, was he just opens up the capsule, air sucks out, he gets back in, and he turns the air on. But she didn't have time to get her helmet on. She kind of just like covers her face, and you're kind of, I'm going there like bullshit. She would be dead because your body actually needs air pressure to survive. It's your body is built with the assumption that it will have air pressure around it. If you ever heard of explosive decompression, it's real. So if you suddenly lose and there's no air pressure on, your body kind of like freaks out in an expansive sort of way. If you've ever seen the end of the original Total Recall, you know what we mean. In fact, it's implied that's how several of the other astronauts died when they were in the shuttle. But she somehow survives this. And I guess that's kind of the only clue that it's a dream sequence. He gets in and he eventually does this thing, and it eventually becomes. I was getting ready to call bullshit. Oh, come on, she should be dead. Oh, it is a dream sequence. Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll shut the fuck up now. But it is a smart movie. That's what we're talking about. It is a smart movie like that, and it's one of the few movies that pulled that trick where I did not actually see that as a dream sequence. Partially because of the way they wrote that character. Which, by the way, George Clooney's character is very likable. George Clooney plays a really likable mission commander. It's extremely cool. Even when it comes time to self-sacrifice himself, like he shot up. He ran out of fuel on his little jetpack, trying to get to the International Space Station, and they're trying to catch on to this thing, and Sandra Bullock's character eventually gets wrapped up in some ropes, and it catches her. And I think this is one scene where there should have been I think physics would have actually dictated that they would have survived, but she grabs a hold of him, and he's like, I'm gonna let go. Because if the rope is wrapped too loosely around you, if you pull me in, it's going to come unloose and we'll both fly out. So it's like, bye, let's go. And, of course, he's still able to talk with her for like I don't know if it's 10 minutes, but several minutes after he lets go and he's slowly floating away. So as he's floating away, he's coaching her through, and he's also making like he's still making jokes. It's very nonchalant the way the guy's just like, yeah, well, I guess I'm going to die. Cool. So you go, by the way, it's like, you still find me hot though, right? He plays the character very, very likable right up until the end, and that's exactly why later on, like, he's mostly concerned, actually, as he's floating off into the distance, that he's going to beat, like, the spacewalk record. He's like, he's kind of actually somewhat excited that by doing this, he'll actually go down as the longest spacewalk, and he's like, it's going to be a while before anyone breaks this record. And he kind of, as you hear him way off in the distance, the last thing he does is he kind of just puts on his, at least the last thing you hear from his transmission is he just kind of puts on his, like, radio so he can listen to some tunes and, like, watch the Earth. That's why I said you kind of believe this character, since he's so calm and collective, the way the scene how it plays later on in a dream, that you don't actually realize it's a dream. So you got that. You're starting to get a sense. The suspense, though, has worked really well. The plot, outside of that, that's the one scene where I said where when she lets go is, I'm pretty sure when all she has to do is give a slight tug, and then physics determines he'll have a slight movement. He would be moving towards the space station at that point. So I think they did this right around it at that point. I mean, if you're a physics major and you've seen this movie, or you're a physicist or something, please correct me because the rest of the movie seems very, very real and authentic. And I think that adds a heavy... It adds to the movie greatly. For example, in the trailers they show kind of like the sounds, you hear the screeching explosions. In the movie you don't. And it kind of adds to the horror and to the suspense. For example, there is a scene while she's trying to fix up the Soyuz so she can escape from the shuttle. And they kind of made mention earlier that that debris field would come back around. And as she's fixing it, you start noticing in the background, very slowly, like you'll see one small piece of something fly by. And you might not catch it at first, and then another piece will fly by, and then another, and another, and slowly it's picking up. So you're not for sure when you start. Like, you might catch something in the background real quick, and you weren't sure what that was. And as it's slowly building up, and then they have a very, very subtle orchestra. It's not even like really like music as it is like a very slow and humble, menacing sound that's very obviously instrumental, but it very subtly starts to pick up while this is happening. And then before you know it, in the background, without her noticing, because again, no sound, chunks of the space station are just getting destroyed. And it becomes suspenseful when she's gonna know. When is she gonna know that that stuff's happening back there? And that's a really, really effective scene. And also just to see like the destruction of what's going on, and they hear nothing. It's very disconcerting. By taking the sound out, it actually adds a lot to that, because you can only imagine what that would sound like. I was also somewhat surprised of when there is. Oh, they have one scene though. Early on, again, after she first gets picked up by Clooney, who does have the jetpack and is able to eventually get out and get her from like flying crazy. Gets her, brings her back. They do have the scene where I said there was one other guy floating around in the background. They go to pick up his body, and they do show his head with a giant hole. And no gore, really, which I could buy in space. It's kind of chilly up there, so you'd have freeze. But literally, when I say a hole, as in when she sees his head, there's just a big giant mass missing in the middle, and she can see straight through that. You can look right through this guy's face. And then I'm looking at the actor, they obviously modeled after it. If you go into IMDb and look up Paul Sharma, yeah, picture that, but with like the middle gone and just seeing the background behind him. That's pretty much what you do. It's surprisingly graphic, actually, even though it doesn't have like dripping blood, which you wouldn't have in space. But surprisingly graphic and surprisingly effective. You see the other frozen floating corpses when they get back to the space shuttle. So, it also kind of scary to realize something like this could happen, and it's like in case you're watching this because you're not going to see the movie, but you're kind of interested in what happens. We'll go into the end. It ends on a very positive note, where she really, after that dream sequence, she really gets it together and is like, I'm gonna fucking live, damn it. And it ends very positively, very uplifting. I really do recommend this movie as a pick-me-up movie, because at the end you do feel that exhilaration of life, like, I'm going to live, damn it, or I'm gonna die trying. You like that character at that. You like that character at the end, that's picking up, getting her shit together, and going, fuck it, I'm gonna make it. And you're like, fuck yeah! So as she's doing that, she lands. And by the way, if you are freaked out by the concept of like just choking like no air to death, they decided to throw one more spook at you, because when she lands, she of course lands in somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where she landed country-wise, but you kind of hear on the radio, oh, we're going to dispatch a rescue mission. But when the inside of her capsule though is on fire, so she opens the door, and of course she could have landed anywhere and been okay. But she landed in the middle of the lake. So when she opens the capsule, it starts to flood, and she has a scene where she's on Earth, and she's, drowning, eventually, struggling to make it out onto the surface of the Earth, and it ends with her just. I thought they would end with like maybe some helicopters showing up in the background, but they at least covered it that a rescue mission. They somehow figured out that her capsule is active. But and so they're sending out a rescue mission, but it ends with her just like standing up on Earth. She's in the middle of the wilderness basically, and this ends with her standing up and looking up at these mountains, and it just ends with like this triumphant music, and that's why I said very, very uplifting ending. If you want a movie that you feel good and you feel like you've earned that feel-good movement. Like this is not a dumb movie that's like just feel good about stuff. This movie really does feel like you've earned it. Kind of like that. Oh, was it 162 hours? What was it? I forget the name because it's a number. I forget how many hours, but it's that guy that he got trapped out. It's based on a real life. He was trapped out in the desert, and he got his arm caught in the rocks, and he eventually just takes out a knife and cuts it off like, I'm gonna live, damn it. And that was another one where you end it positively, but you feel like sometimes it's like just it feels too hokey, or like what's that one that it's now being advertised as a movie that's like this about the family with Ewan McGregor, and actually I think Sandra Bullock's in that one too. And those movies, they really never feel that you've earned the feel good ending, and it always feels so much shallow. This you so feel like that character has earned that, and you go with her at that ending. It really sells it, and the realisticness of it, everything it sells, and kind of makes you a little freaked out that just based on how real that whole debris field thing could be, which kind of makes you wonder what the hell were the Russians doing, like taking out like there's a reason that both when the us Americans and the Chinese did those little, basically the weapons tests. They like to come up with other excuses for them, but to see if they could take out a satellite, they took it out in really, really low orbit, so it would just burn up in the atmosphere. Because they were afraid of exactly this thing happening. And you've just wiped out like they actually say before they lose it, like, we're losing every satellite. The whole global satellite system is being wiped out. We are effed. Scared that could happen, because she might have survived, but I don't think the economy did. That's like decades to replace that satellite infrastructure. So, yeah, can't recommend the movie enough. See it, definitely worth it. Not so much as a horror film, even though it's October. You're looking for some horror films now. So I go check it out. You will probably like the movie. As for site news, before I head on out, definitely because I went to go see this with some friends. I did not see the Legend of Korra. I've been doing reviews on that. Expect to I will probably have that up tomorrow. I'll probably check it out tomorrow afternoon. As for movies next week, let's see if there's anything worth watching coming out. September was really dry, especially after Riddick. There's really wasn't much, but we are in October, and there's a lot of stuff coming out this fall that I want to see. So as I pull up October, it is the 4th. Actually, there's still some stuff. I'm surprised I didn't see Rush. But, I mean, even this weekend there is Runner. Maybe, probably not going to see it. Let's see what's coming out next week. Oh, Machete. This is one of those where there's a couple of movies coming out that look good, but I'll probably see only one of them. And Captain Phillips, which again, the only problem that looks like a problem with that movie is the name. But I'm going to go see Machete Kills. So expect that one next week. And then I think on the 18th, Carrie looks good, but the Fifth Estate looks good, but I got to see The Escape Plan. Sorry. I'm seeing The Escape Plan. It's Arnold and Stallone. Actually, I'm really looking at this. It's surprising. It's October and there's like no horror movies. What the hell, Hollywood? What the hell? Carrie's the only one. I am disappointed. I am really disappointed in you, Hollywood. Especially since you had a rather decent year with horror, considering you've had The Conjuring, which is, horror classic in the making, in my opinion. But I digress. I've gone on for about 35 minutes. Stay tuned for your... Oh, yeah. I should Now, maybe I might make a video about the Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, just because I have some problems with the direction they're taking that franchise. So I might do a video on that, but that'll be for maybe tomorrow. So signing off. Please subscribe, like, share, all that stuff. Bye.